Krennan Harbor to Ardrishaig, a journey along the Crinan Canal. This journey begins at lock number 14 on the Crinan Canal at Crinan Basin. The full journey along the canal is from Crinan to Ardrishaig, which is just over 14 kilometres or about 9 miles. However, if you don't want to do the whole route, there are shorter sections. These are Crinan to Bellan to Kenban, or Oakfield to Ardrishaig. There are opportunities to stop for refreshments and toilet facilities at Ardrishaig, Loch Gilp, Kenban and Crinan. This journey takes you along the canal towpath. On the way, you'll discover a lot about the canal and the landscape it passes through. Each stopping point is marked with a blue coloured disc where you can stop and watch the podcast. By the late 1700s, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing and canals were all the rage because they could transport cargoes quickly and cheaply. A canal that could shortcut the long voyage around Kintyre seemed an excellent idea, and work on the Crinan Canal began in 1794. It was built from Ardrishaig to Crinan on the Sound of Jura and opened in 1801. But there were problems right from the start, and after a few years of leaks on the one hand and shortage of water on the other, the canal company asked the famous engineer Thomas Telford to draw up a list of improvements. These were finished in 1817, and the canal has worked pretty well since then. Boats sailing the 9 miles between Loch Gilp and the Sound of Jura have to negotiate 15 locks, which allow them to climb 65 metres to the canal summit at Kenban and then descend to sea level at Crinan. The first stopping point is at Loch 14 by the Crinan Basin. If you're not already there, make your way along to the first stopping point and press the play button on your media player when you get there. Now press pause. Crinan used to be a bustling port and was once known as Port Ree, or the King's Port. Fishing boat skippers sent their catch by boat along the canal to the smokehouses of Ardrishaig and then on to Glasgow. Linnet Cottage marks the point where passengers on the steamer the Linnet disembarked and made their way down to the pier. At the pier, they usually boarded another steamer to continue their journey north towards Oban, Fort William, Mallaig and the islands. There are treacherous tidal currents in the sea here. The most notable is the Corryvreckan whirlpool between Jura and Scarba. Among the many ships wrecked here was the Comet, the pioneer steam vessel that lies wrecked just off Craignish Point. Around on the other side of the headland from here, and accessible by footpath, is Krennan Harbor, which was built in a natural cove. This area is famous for the old acid works, where they produced pyroligneous acid. Its simpler name is wood vinegar, which was made from vapour produced by distilling wood in airless conditions. This industry, along with charcoal production, relied heavily on managing the ancient woodland, and this is partly why so much of it survives in the area today. All that is left of the acid works now is the tall red brick chimney. Continue your journey along the towpath to the next stopping point at Crinan Bridge. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. Along this stretch of the canal, you will see the sharp rocks on the south side. This was known as Propeller Corner. When the canal was drained for maintenance 100 years ago, 15 tons of ships' propellers were salvaged from the silt. You have to guess how they got there. This contradicts the words of Dan McPhail, engineer of the Puffer, the Vital Spark. He sang, "Aye, the Crinan Canal for me, it's neither too big nor too wee." Aye, well, it could have done have been a bit wider at this point. The canal here was carved out of the hardest of rock, which took a huge amount of time, effort and wages. North of here, you'll see a spit of land called Crinan Ferry, where a passenger service used to connect with Crinan. You can see the slipway near the bridge. As you go further along the canal, you'll see how it gets wider. Very different from the narrow waterway you've just passed. Carry along the towpath to the next stopping point at Bellan Bridge. On your way, you'll pass Bellan Marina. Like the canal at Oakfield, this is another place where the canal burst its banks in 1853 and had to be rerouted. Rows of stones show its original route. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. If you look north from here, you'll see across the Moynavor National Nature Reserve. Moynavor means great moss in Gaelic. This is what's called a raised mire or bog, and it's one of the largest left in Britain. It's a very important habitat and home to a wide range of plants, insects and other creatures that thrive in the damp conditions. Before the very straight road was built, much of the moss was inaccessible apart from stretches alongside the River Ad. Bellan Bridge crosses the canal. An island-ad bridge which was built in 1851 crosses the meandering River Ad. In the distance from here, you can see Dunad Fort. Around the 5th century AD, the kings of Dalriata made this early fort their chief seat of power. They were the Scotti from Ireland, a Gaelic-speaking people who expanded their territory from its heartland in Argyll until they eventually gave their name to Scotland. Archaeologists have learnt much about the people who lived at Dunad just from digging a few trenches. They have uncovered evidence of fine metalworking and crafts, local and imported pottery, and quernstones for milling grain. In its time, this was one of the most important early medieval power centres in Scotland. Continue along the towpath until you reach lock number 10. Cross over the lock gate and walk to the derelict building just below Loch 9. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. Just below Loch 9 is a derelict boathouse called the Linnet Shed. This is where McBrain's housed their passenger boat, the Linnet, for an annual overhaul during the winter. The Linnet left the boathouse for the last time in 1929 after more than 60 years' service. Buses were quicker and meant that fewer passengers used the steamer, which was then sold to new owners. Photos taken in 1937 show the boathouse was still intact then, but now only its ruined walls stand as a reminder of the canal's busy past. There is also a detour here to the Forestry Commission's Ardrishaig car park. You can take short walks to spectacular viewpoints and experience the Near to Nature trail. Cross back over the canal and return to the north side. Carry on along the towpath to the next stopping point beside lock number 9 at Dunardry. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. You're now at Dunardry. The waters above Loch 9 mark the highest point, or what's called the summit reach of the Crinan Canal. The Linnet could get from Ardrishaig to Crinan in less than 2 hours, but only because she had priority over all other vessels. The lock gates and bridges were always set ready for her to travel through. Usually it took most of the day for boats to travel the length of the canal, and the long climb up and down through the locks to this point is the slowest part of the journey. The small loch here is Loch Avarin, whose water supplies the canal. Archaeologists reckon that this is an artificial loch dating from medieval times, maybe 1,000 years ago. There are also another 7 lochs constructed in the surrounding hills, cascading water down to feed the canal. The land around here belonged to Clan MacTavish until the 18th century, but only a few stones of their castle remain. The rest were used to fill a breach in the canal when a part of the embankment collapsed in 1809. Continue along the towpath to the next stopping point at lock number 5 at Kenban. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. Kenban flourished after the Crinan Canal was built and the Inverary to Oban Road was opened. However, there's nothing new about people living here. They've done so for thousands of years. On the south side of the canal, Bronze Age settlers erected a burial cairn on a small rocky outcrop. Kenban, which is Gaelic for white cairn, takes its name from this ancient site. Archaeologists found human bones here in the mid-1800s, as well as carved slabs of rock and fragments of flint. The remains of Dunhuan Hill Fort sits on a flat-top crag above and behind the Kenban Hotel. Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, ordered a fort to be built here after he defeated Edward II at Bannockburn in 1314. The site has probably been used and modified many times throughout history. There's a 20-minute detour here along the path beside the Kenban Hotel. It will take you up to see the cup and ring markings that were carved into the rocks on the hillside 5,000 years ago. Nobody knows what these markings mean, but some people think they indicate ancient routes, while others suggest that they mark important viewpoints. We're unlikely to ever know for sure. Continue along the towpath to the next stopping point at Oakfield Moss. Along the way, have a look at the area to the north across the moss, which contains a rich collection of ancient standing stones and carved rocks. Stop at the bench at the large bend in the canal. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. On the eastern bank of the canal, just ahead of here, is a stretch of land known as Oakfield Moss. The boggy ground here made it very difficult to build this stretch of canal. The embankment sank 9 feet soon after it was constructed, and the bank was completely washed away during a flood in 1805. The canal was rerouted on firmer ground, but you can still see the line of birch trees and scrub which mark out the original route on the inside of the bend. Continue along the towpath to the next stopping point at Oakfield Bridge. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. This is Oakfield Bridge, one of the oldest structures still surviving on the canal. It's a swing bridge that allows boats to sail past here. It was built in 1871 and is still called Miller's Bridge after William Miller, who was the bridge keeper at the end of the 19th century. You can see the bridge keeper's cottage on the bank of the canal. At the junction near here, you can finish your journey and take the road into Loch Gilp Head with its tourist information centre, shops and tea rooms. Continue along the towpath to the next stopping point at a small building with a water waster inside. We'll explain it when you get there. You will see the inscription 1895 on the building. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. The small stone building you can see beside the towpath houses a very ingenious device. It's called a water waster. When the water level in the canal gets too high and there's a risk of flooding for parts of Ardrishaig, the waster solves the problem automatically. John Groves, a former manager of the canal, designed the equipment which was built in 1895. You can peer into the building through a window and see the machinery inside. The way it works is very simple. The water waster has a rocker arm with a plug at one end and a bucket at the other. When the canal water reaches its maximum height, it starts to spill into the bucket. This tilts the rocker arm, which lifts up the plug, and the water spills into Loch Gilp through a sluice pipe. This process can happen hundreds of times a day. It's not bad for a bit of machinery that's more than 100 years old. Looking east from here, as you make your way to the next point, you can see the dark waters of Loch Gilp. Their murky appearance is from the mud and silt which is built up behind the old causeway. It was built by the owner of Kilmorey Castle around the time of Queen Victoria's visit, in the hope of encouraging her to visit Kilmorey when she arrived by boat at Ardrishaig. However, this did not happen, and the causeway was only ever used to bypass Loch Gilp Head when travelling between Kilmorey and Ardrishaig. It is said that the owner of the castle preferred to avoid the town as he had fallen out with the councillors. Continue along the towpath to the next stop directly opposite the row of new white houses on the other side of the canal. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. Across the canal from here is where the Glendar Distillery stood. When it was built in 1831, it was one of the first legal distilleries in the area. No doubt there were several illegal ones too. The distillery was built alongside the canal so that barley could be unloaded directly into the malting sheds and the whisky could be shipped out. The water for making the whisky was taken from the Darrach burn. The Glendar Distillery was taken over by the Glenfine Distillery Company in 1919. They stopped distilling in 1937 but still used the building to store whisky until the mid-1970s. As you can see, no trace of it remains today, not even a whiff of Uskevea, the water of life. This is also where the Kildusclin Burn flows into the canal. A walk from here takes you up Kildusclin Glen to the Robber's Den. Stories tell of a young robber who was forced to hide out there until he was cornered by his enemies and killed. Continue along the towpath, staying on this side of the canal to the next stopping point, just above lock number 4. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. This is where passengers embarked on the tourist steamer called the Linnet for their leisurely journey to Crinan. David McBrain started operating it in 1866, and it's probably one of the most photographed passenger boats that sailed along the canal. Its red funnel, belching smoke, was a familiar sight. The Linnet sailed in the summertime and carried around 300 passengers. There are lots of old photographs showing people crammed onto her decks like sardines. This is also where Queen Victoria stepped aboard a boat called the Sunbeam for a 2-hour journey along the canal as part of her tour of Scotland in 1847. Huge crowds greeted her at Ardrishaig Harbor, which was decorated with a floral arch and a tartan-covered pier. Her visit sparked off a lot of excitement, which helped start a tourist boom for the canal. You'll see on the east side of the canal a tall white building, which started life as a coaching inn called the Paultalach Posting House, but its name was changed to the Royal Hotel in honour of Queen Victoria's visit. Continue until you reach the next stopping point beside the War Memorial between locks 2 and 3. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. When herring fishing was at its busiest here in the late 1800s, this patch of ground where the War Memorial now stands was where the fishermen used to hang out their nets to dry. The nets were hung over large wooden frames known locally as the stances. The white buildings you can see across the road are where the passengers from the Glasgow steamers passed through the turnstiles before joining one of the boats that carried them along the canal to Crinan. At Crinan, many passengers would board another steamer to take them up to Fort William and beyond. Continue along past Loch 2 and cross over the metal swing bridge at the road. Make your way to the small white British Waterways building beside Loch 1. Press play when you reach the next stopping point. Now press pause. We're starting our journey here at the Sealock in Ardrishaig. This lock was built in the 1930s so that boats could enter or leave the canal at any state of the tide in Loch Fyne. Ardrishaig was just a small seasonal fishing community before the canal brought the village new wealth and, over time, the beginnings of its tourist trade. A breakwater protected the canal entrance, and soon it sheltered a busy harbour which handled all kinds of goods, and fishermen landed herring for Loch Fyne's famous kippers. Although the canal did much to help Ardrishaig prosper, it was already earmarked for expansion. The landowners, the MacNeils of Gia, wanted to rehouse their tenants in the village so that they could use their land for sheep, which produced a better income. This is the end of your podcast journey. If returning to Crinan, you can either go back the way you came or catch a bus. You should try to visit Kilmartin Glen with its spectacular prehistoric sites, or explore the many delights of Knapdale Forest. For more information on what to see and do in the area, discover Dalriada at www.dalriadaproject.org.